Dragging Canoe, 1775.
Land was the most important reason, but not the only one, for the rising anger the Cherokee felt against the whites. In the 1730s, European diseases had wiped out more than a third of the Cherokee tribe. And the tribe was losing many of its traditions. They had always prospered by hunting, growing, or making everything they needed to live. But by this time, they were selling great volumes of deer skins to the traders in return for fabrics, metal tools, and copper kettles. They had started to resent being so dependent on European goods.
My people cannot live independent of the English. The clothes we wear we cannot make ourselves. They are made for us. We use their ammunition with which to kill deer. We cannot make our own guns. Every necessary of life we must have from the white people. Chief Skiagunsta, 1745.
Throughout the 18th century, English, French, settlers, and Indians were mired in combat in Appalachia. It was said a man could live from boyhood to old age and never know a time of peace. The culminating battle began when the colonies declared their independence in 1776. The American Revolution was hard fought in the mountains by all the friends and foes of the colonial cause. Many Cherokee looked to the British as their allies. They found themselves on the opposite side of the frontiersmen who had learned so well to fight in Indian style.
In the American Revolution, the Cherokees were divided. Most favored the British because in 1763, the king had issued a proclamation that prohibited westward expansion. Now, this infuriated many of the colonists, but from the Indian perspective, the king was standing up for their rights.
The British searched in every quarter for people who remained loyal to the king.
We have to remember that the Revolution was a civil war. There were people on both sides. By and large, the people who were on the side of the crown or who were neutral or indifferent in Appalachia did not take up arms. One of the assumptions of the British Army that invaded the South in the 1780s was that if they reached the backcountry, that the loyalists there would rise up, and that didn't happen.
Most of the mountaineers, especially the Scotch-Irish, were fiercely committed to throwing over British rule. They were among the first to sign up when George Washington sent out the call for troops.
The Scotch-Irish had declared that these colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent. And it was from these that came that outburst of rugged and determined people that made the Declaration of 1776 possible. Colonel A.K. McClure, newspaper editor.
The most famous backcountry fighters were the Over-Mountain men of Tennessee, who defeated the stalwart Colonel Ferguson at the Battle of Kings Mountain in South Carolina. Ferguson had threatened to cross the Appalachians and exterminate the people if they didn't support the king. In his proclamation, he called the mountaineers white barbarians. To the colonel's surprise, the barbarians charged his forces, seeking cover behind rocks and chasing the soldiers up the mountain, tree by tree. They killed nearly 200 British troops, including Colonel Ferguson.
Well, they won. They won because they adopted the Indian style of warfare as they had before, and they won because the loyalists in the backwoods didn't rise up in support of the British Army.
The surprise victory snuffed out British hopes for taking the South and was a critical turning point in making America the land of the free. George Washington said if he ever had to make a last stand, he would want to stand with the Over-Mountain boys who knew how to shoot and fight. When the revolution was over, land that the Indians had fought so hard to save officially became part of the new country.
The Indians had chosen the wrong side. The British support was not sustained, and the British cut them off at the knees, we would say today, when the Peace Treaty of Paris in 1783 was announced and gave the United States what was, from the Indian standpoint, their land.
The revolution was a turning point for Appalachia. The region headed into a period of significant growth and change. Thousands of soldiers were rewarded with free homesteads, bringing a flood of new settlers to the mountains. And the proud mountaineer would soon find himself doing battle with the very government he had just helped bring to power.
Come on, all you booze fighters, if you want to hear about the kind of booze that we sell around here. It's made way back in the swamps and the hills where there's plenty of moonshine still.
The Scotsmen had always known how to make liquor from barley and rye. They quickly learned to use Indian crops instead. Wheat and corn, berries and potatoes, just about anything that grew. Selling whiskey was good business, much more profitable than selling any of the bulky raw crops. But George Washington's government was buried in debt, and one of the ways they tried to pay it off was with a tax on whiskey.
The settlers of the Western country were so opposed to this tax because it was very reminiscent of the taxes that were imposed on the colonists under the rule of King George of England. The people that were on the frontier were the rugged individualists. They're the veterans of the American Revolution that fought to establish this country.
They were very jealous of their property and their rights. They valued freedom. They did not want to be told what to do by anyone.
A string of violent protests broke out from New York to Georgia. It became known as the Whiskey Rebellion, and it raged from 1791 to 1794. The new tax was not to be tolerated.
It was a tax that was required to be paid in cash. And cash was scarce on the frontier. Whiskey was a commodity that was used as money. Ministers were known to even accept payment for their Sunday services with whiskey.
One drop will make a rabbit whip a bulldog. One drop will make a cat chase a wild hog. Make a bullfrog spit in a black snake's face, and make a hard-shell preacher fall from grace.
It would be not uncommon when a federal tax collector would come here that they would tar and feather him. One violent outbreak in the Western Carolina region, they actually took the excise tax collector and ground his nose off at a grinding wheel.
And the lamb will lay down with the lion after drinking this old moonshine.
This was a fight the settlers could not win. Washington took 13,000 troops into western Pennsylvania under his personal command. It was an army as big as the one that had fought the Revolution. The rebellious moonshiners were crushed. Rules and regulations were bound to be imposed on these people who wanted to believe they could just be left alone. The Appalachian mountaineer could grow or make everything he needed to survive. He had learned to rely on himself and did not want outsiders dictating how he was to think or behave in politics or in religion. Just as the stubborn pioneer bridled at government authority, he also had little use for the old world hierarchy of the church. He would follow the call of his spirit and find his own way to God. The mountain legacy of independent thinking about religion continues to this day in the astonishing variety of churches still to be found in Appalachia.
Appalachia is really marvelously diverse religiously. Particularly Central Appalachia may be one of the most religiously diverse areas of the nation. Baptists, for example, we've got well over 40 varieties of Baptists. Regular Baptist, Old Regular Baptist, United Baptist, Union Baptist, Separate Baptist, Two-Seed in the Spirit Predestinarian Baptist.
In many mountain churches, religion is intensely physical and emotional. People continue to practice religious exercises that date back hundreds of years. This bodily expression and the wide array of sects first took root in the dynamic religious activity of the 18th and 19th centuries. Immigrants had arrived in Appalachia with different traditions. There were Anglicans and Baptists from England. From Germany, a range of Protestant groups. And the Scotch-Irish were mostly Presbyterian. But the established churches could not find a foothold on the frontier, where distances were great and communication difficult. For a few generations, worship was held inside the family or in the most humble mountain chapel. The religion most had carried with them was Calvinistic, tough, dark, and demanding.
John Calvin imagined that God was all-powerful, knew all things, had predestined all things, and who knew who would be saved and who wouldn't be saved. But it was a grim theology in a way, because you might not be among the elect. God was only going to save a remnant of the human race.
But people like John Wesley, one of the founders of Methodism, had been spreading newer ideas through Europe, especially the notions of a gentler God and human free will.
The old intellectual Calvinism started giving way to this new thought that God is all-loving, God would like to save us all we have to do is repent and ask for forgiveness, and we can be saved. That's the doctrine of free will, that we have it upon ourselves to decide whether or not to be saved. Well, this is more optimistic. People could get happy with religion.
By the 1740s, this more hopeful vision was spreading